In this episode, I sit down and talk with the campaign director of Michigan Justice Advocacy, Rich Griffin. Rich talks about his life behind bars and what it was like going into prison at a very young age. Now, there's something I talk about quite often on the podcast, and it's that we are not our mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. Everyone does things that hurts the people that they love, and we are not that. As long as you choose to try to make a more proactive step into fixing the mistake you made. I believe people can change completely. To think that and to have the perspective that once a shitty person, always a shitty person is completely absurd. And in Rich's case, he made a very big mistake at a very young age and had to pay the consequences for his choices. But as a well thought out and educated adult, Richard has used his experiences to help those who were like him. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with him. This was by far the longest episode I have ever done, but I left this conversation feeling informed, and honestly, I have a different perspective of the mass incarceration industry here in Michigan. Please consider following me on social media for future giveaways, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Thank you, and I hope you guys enjoy. All right. Welcome to the Rise and Above podcast. My name is David Hess, and today I have Rich Griffin with me. He is an advocate for the Michigan Justice Advocacy Program. And what that is right now they're working on legislation to try to reform the prison system.
Yeah.
So I guess before we get into that, I want Richard to introduce himself, explain where he's from, and a little bit about his past and how he got involved with this program.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I am technically from West Michigan, Grand Rapids. Born and raised there until I was about 16 years old. I currently work in Lansing and other areas of the state, but coming from Grand Rapids, I come from a biracial mother and father. Grew up in the inner city, late 80s, early 90s, when, the illicit drug sales, violence in, urban communities was on the rise. Grew up relatively normal home. Both of my parents were around and were married for 40 plus years. So I always had my father in the home. That brought other issues between he and I, but he was always present. But around the age of 11, I got involved with a group of friends and associates that, were not as, they weren't in a privileged position as myself. Many of them didn't have their fathers in their homes. Mothers were, either on drugs, missing in some capacity. And I got involved in a lot of juvenile delinquent stuff, like very, very early. By the time I was 13, I had been incarcerated in juvenile facilities a couple of times, and I served about 90 days in a group home, which is a foster care system, kind of, but ran by the juvenile or probate department of juvenile department of probate court. After a short period of that, I was released and then came back to my mother's home, and then I left at the age of 15 on my own for good. Wow. And probably the worst decision I could have ever made. I would say about 18 months, 20 months after I moved out of my mother's home, I was arrested and charged for open murder, assault with intent to commit murder, and felony firearm in Kent County, Michigan. I was automatically waived as a juvenile, tried as an adult in Kent County Court, convicted of second-degree homicide, felony firearm, and assault with intent to commit murder, and sentenced to serve the rest of my life in prison in Michigan.
At 15 years old?
16. I was
16.
Just had turned 16, arrested and convicted and sentenced prior to turning 17. And then I was committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections at 17 years old to serve 2 life sentences. Fast forward, I don't know how many years it was, but in 2012, there was a United States Supreme Court case, Miller v. Alabama. A young kid in Alabama committed a homicide And the United States Supreme Court ruled that it was an Eighth Amendment violation. The Eighth Amendment is that, everybody is free from cruel and unusual punishment. United States Supreme Court ruled that, sentencing any juvenile or someone under the age of 18 to spend the rest of their natural life in prison was cruel and unusual punishment, and they reversed it, but they didn't make it retroactive. And for folks who, aren't legal beagles, retroactivity just means that it would apply to everybody who was incarcerated before the change. 4 years later, 2016, by this time I've served 22 years.
Okay.
They made it retroactive. Now, because it was a second degree conviction, it was impossible for me to serve natural life. The Michigan statute wouldn't allow it. So my sentence was a parolable life sentence, which meant that after 15 years, I became eligible for parole. The philosophy in Michigan coming out of the 80s, Engler administration, through the 90s, the parole board was tough on crime, to the T. And their philosophy was life means life, whether it's parolable or non-parolable. If you have a life sentence, you'll serve life in prison. The Miller v. Alabama ruling assisted me because as a juvenile, even though I have an adult sentence, I was a juvenile when I was convicted. And in 2017, upon my regular review, which, I was doing 5-year intervals of seeing the parole board.
Okay.
I was released. I received a parole in September of 2017. I was released November 28, 2017.
Wow.
Right after my 39th birthday. So 23 years straight in the Department of Corrections and 4 years of correctional control in the community.
Wow.
So I'll be off of parole, I think, in 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
So I have these conversations with many folks, like they come from all walks of life. And I'm, in this moment, reminded of a conversation I had with a film student from USC, and I can't think of his name. He was working in the community for faith-based organizations trying to, galvanize folks for stories that, came out of the community. Mm-hmm. We talked, and he, and I mentioned to him, like, I just served 23 years in prison, yada, yada, yada. Like, no big deal to me, but he, like, his mouth is wide open. Like, what? How did you survive it? Now, my response to him was going to be canned. At that time, I had been working in the legislative field for a little bit for the ACLU of Michigan, and I'll touch on that here in a minute. But I had a response to give, and I just paused and I didn't give him the canned answer. The canned answer was the truth, but I explained to him that I didn't survive it. I don't know why he thought I survived it. Nobody at the age of 16 who goes into any adult prison facility survives that.
It breaks you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it breaks your spirit. If there's children that have been convicted, or sentenced to spend ridiculous amounts of time in prison, not a year, not 3. Mm-hmm. A year is tough for a kid.
I imagine.
But serving 2 life sentences on top of a couple of years for firearms, when you get to the 14th, 15th year, your soul is broke by then, and that's what the correcting part is to dehumanize you and break you down so that you're exhausted and can't rebel or buck or be antisocial anymore. But it's hell, man. It's psychological hell. Physically, anybody can deal with prison. I mean, everybody in prison not tough. Everybody there not tough. But psychologically, it's the worst thing to deal with in the world. It's
you're putting human beings in a cage.
You're putting them in a closet.
In a closet.
You and your brother you wouldn't have a cell this size. I mean, you were talking a third of this maybe.
Wow.
For 2 people, 2 grown adults, with a bathroom.
Can't even lay on the ground.
No.
Do a push-up.
Nah, not with the other person in there. But it is. It's I had someone ask me this question the other day. A good friend of mine who's in a privileged position directing an organization doing some similar work, and he was like, there's some people that just deserve to be there, Rich, and that's tough to say that. It's tough to say that. I don't disagree, but the way in which our civilization here in America approaches crime and punishment is archaic at best. Um, and those things need to be looked at. We need to make adjustments in how we treat folks because, excuse me, I would say out of the 2.2 million people incarcerated in America, in our federal prisons and jails, 65% of those crimes were survival crimes. They were trying to survive poverty. And that's at the root cause of, folks that we see, through the mass incarceration wave over the last 30, 40 years, is we were dealing with a poverty issue, and our response as irresponsible Americans was to just put people in closets.
Right.
So once I got released November of 17. Prior to my release, I was attending college at Jackson,
So
Albion.
did you have a game plan as far as like when you knew you were going to get released, right?
No, I didn't know I would get out until. So the process for a lifer is you would get a notification that the parole board wants to review your file. A file review only means that they'll take a half-hearted look at your prison jacket and say, hey, well, he got into a fight 7 years ago. We're not interested in talking to him.
Wow.
Or he's not had a misconduct in 20 years. He's learned how to manipulate the system. We don't want to talk to him.
Really?
Either way, it's like either way you go, you're kind of stuck with it. So it's a gamble. It's a crapshoot. You never know if they're going to be interested in reviewing you or not.
Wow.
I got reviewed in 2007. I had received a 5-year continuation. I was the sentencing judge in my case, wrote the parole board in 2009 and asked for them to release me. They reviewed me in 2010 and then denied me and continued me on another 5-year installation. In 2012, I was reviewed again, same thing, another 5-year installation.
Jeez.
In 2017, I was told that I'd be seeing the parole board February. February came, it was reviewed. At that point, they need to make a determination on whether or not you're going to have a public hearing. A public hearing is 2 to 3 board members present and somebody from the Attorney General's office for the state of Michigan and anybody in support or in opposition to your parole.
Mm-hmm.
I received a public hearing in August, and I got a parole in September.
Wow.
So
it's immediately.
It's very lengthy process to get there. But the moment they make the decision, the parole was like stamped September 8th, and they had 60 days to release me. So I was released in November.
So what was that moment like? The moment, you had seen the inside of prison for 23 years.
Yeah.
or more.
Tough, because at every stage of the parole process, I was concerned whether or not I would make it to the next point, like whether or not there would be a fight or some misunderstanding that I was, caught up in. Let's say there's a riot and I have a decision to either, let's say for instance, somebody in the unit says, hey, they found maggots in the potatoes last night. They put potatoes on the menu today. We don't want nobody going to chow. If you go to the chow hall, we're going to stab you. Either don't go to the chow hall and I participate in this riot,
right,
or I go home. So like things like that can happen, and you just think about all of the possibilities, things you've seen over the years. So it was like the angst and the anxiety was out of this world for those couple of months.
I imagine. I
get the parole in September, and then I was transferred from Cotton Correctional Facility to Bellamy Creek Correctional Facility, which is like the re-entry hub for folks going to West Michigan.
Okay.
I went there for 60 days, and the day that I walked out, it was light, but it was a lighter. I felt lighter, but there was so much for me to be concerned about because now I'm stepping into a world. I'm going back to a society that I know nothing about.
It's completely changed
Different.
since you went in.
Absolutely. And you know, and I wasn't coming home to, you know, you're incarcerated for 23 years. Things happen. I lost my mother several months to cancer right before I got out. You know, most of my family unit had been dispersed, you know, death, moving away, etc. So I wasn't coming home to the same realities. And because of my involvement with different college institutions while I was inside, I was TAing a social and anthro course for Albion while incarcerated, doing work with the University of Michigan and their PCAP program, which is a prisoner creative arts program where they get students to come in and facilitate workshops in like improv and creative writing, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we created debate teams and did all of this with colleges in support. The moment I was released, they're calling me, asking me to come and speak about juvenile justice.
Oh, wow.
And I was home 5 days, and I was on a panel at the University of Michigan with prosecutors, judges, and formerly incarcerated people. I was asked by like 7 people to come speak somewhere.
Wow.
And within a few months, I came to the attention of the ACLU. They were posting positions for their Smart Justice campaign, which they were rolling out over the last few years to halve the incarceral population. And I obtained a job with the ACLU in Michigan and started organizing for them around, pretrial issues, bail issues, mass incarceration, focused legislation, and had a wonderful education there. I worked for them for a couple of years, and it changed my life.
Sounds like it.
Changed my life. I got involved. I got bit by the political bug, and it just, all of the social ills that I see, it gave me a platform. It gave me a way by which to address them. So that's kind of how I get here today is, being incarcerated, advocating for myself in so many ways, working, my legal case, other folks' legal cases, being ingratiated in that, just in the know of that type of information. And then, seeing everything going on in the world and being released into a society that has not, it's worse off now than it was when I left.
Really?
So I think
that's how you look at it.
In many ways. I mean, we look at the millennial generation has expedited transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculous.
Technology wise.
We're all over the place.
Yeah.
We know everything.
Yeah.
We know everything now. But in the way in which we treat people, we've gotten worse. We've gotten worse. And I remark on that because I recall being a 7-8-year-old.
That's your water, by the way.
Thank you.
In case you get there. You're talking a lot, so.
I'm 7-8 years old. Universal understanding in my neighborhood. Street lights come on, you better be in the house.
Yeah.
A group of buddies of mine, 7, 8 of us, going to the mall at 9, 10 years old. We see an old woman, we may help her. We won't be disrespectful to her. She may tell us, pull our pants up, quit cussing. We're going to shut up.
Right. Yeah.
Today, you'll be lucky if you can't keep them kids from assaulting that lady. Today, you'd be lucky if your children come home at night. Like, coming from where I grew up at, like, those children aren't even, their mothers are their best friends.
Right.
I mean, she's only 15 years older than most of them. In many cases, this is the reality. We're growing up with our parents.
Yeah.
So there's no respect for that.
What do you think's changed? Because I mean, you were incarcerated, so you probably have more of a nuanced perspective of everything. Like, you've seen it before and you've seen it after. What do you think has changed in society to where kids are like that now? Because it's something I think has changed since even I was younger. I mean, I'm technically a millennial, but same thing. Like streetlight came on, you're inside,
Yeah.
and you don't question anything. You don't question your mom. She's yelling at you.
Yeah,
Like,
I think what shifted is the general narrative in America. I always use this example. Same-sex marriage was proposed to the U.S. Supreme Court time before it was finally passed.
mhm.
It had been introduced prior,
Right.
but the culture of America, the narrative in America, wasn't ready to see that, right? Well, once we got comfortable in our own skin and we're more accepting in the narrative, the culture shifted,
Mhm.
then it was easy to get it passed. Oh, it's the right thing to do. Pass it, right?
Yeah.
Late 80s, throughout the 90s, the mothers and fathers of those adolescent children were children of, those children were children of baby boomers. Entirely different philosophy on parenting.
Mhm.
We lost a lot of that. And we lost a lot of it because of the prison industrial complex. We lost a lot of it because of the introduction of drugs into urban areas in America. Um, and there may be a few policies that help usher, some changes along, but the family dynamic between, there's a lot of single parent homes in America, no matter race or,
Especially now.
right.
Yeah.
It's almost commonplace now.
Mhm.
And I think that the narrative behind that has shifted so much that the lack of, I won't just point to the lack of fathers in the homes of folks throughout the 80s and 90s, etc., but the lack of the male presence, the lack of a male idea or figure to look at.
Mhm.
I told a buddy of mine yesterday, I don't know if either of you familiar with the show Good Times.
I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
There was a father on there. He played the role of the father, and he was a blue collar factory working guy. Went to work on time, came home on time.
Mhm.
No BS pops.
Right.
nothing, right? Real tough guy.
Yeah. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps type of person.
We don't have none of them fathers in our communities no more. Then we also mentioned Mr. Cosby. He was the American dad
Mhm.
for a lot of kids. That
Yeah.
dudes look to that like, wow, I wish I had that in my home.
Mhm.
Those who did have it wish their fathers were like him, and those who didn't have it wish they had some semblance of a father in the home. That whole idea shifted. Fathers were your connection with your father or your uncle, your older brother was through a prison call or a prison visit,
Right.
or I can't wait for my uncle to come home. I can't wait for to be introduced to my big brother after he served time in prison, and I always go back to prison because in black communities, going to jail is a rite of passage for men. I knew I would be incarcerated at some point in my life. I hope that it wouldn't have been
Sorry
for
about
longer
that.
than, oh, no problem. For about 6 days, but to my chagrin, that didn't happen. How you doing, buddy?
This cat, I tell you.
Hey, I love it. I love it. Very interesting and intelligent species they are.
They are. I call her. What do I call her? I call her little gangster, because she's from the streets. She showed up in our garage one day, just like some.
Just haven't left.
Yeah, hasn't left. We made her a house cat, and she's
Right,
been
right.
here since.
I love it. I love it. Yep. But yeah, it's the narrative in our culture has changed. It's shifted.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of respect, self-respect, a lack of respecting authority, and kids are rebellious. I mean, they'll be like that in every generation. They have to go through
Right.
some form of rebellion. I mean, most teenage generations do. Everyone has had their thing, whether it was driving fast and down the road and busting up mailboxes with a baseball bat,
Yeah.
or whether it was, smoking marijuana on the bleachers.
Yeah.
Somewhere down the line, teenage youth, we're always rebellious. But I think of the relationship between a teacher and a student. We go to school to study a curriculum, that the teacher has been instructed and trained in.
Right.
If the student doesn't get something about the curriculum, doesn't understand the curriculum, doesn't know how to make the curriculum operate, whose fault is it, the child or the teacher's? Well, it's the teacher's responsibility to make sure that the child understands it.
Right.
So even if they have to get creative with that child
Mm-hmm.
and that child alone,
Yeah.
that's their job. And that's our duty as parents and as, adult figures in communities.
Mm-hmm.
It's our responsibility to take a little extra time here or there
Right.
when we see that, somebody's just not getting the right path to life.
Right.
Maybe we can give them some direction. And we're also scared of our youth. We're petrified of them.
I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of resources as well, because like with teachers, for instance, they don't get paid enough to teach. I mean, they're teaching 30 kids in a class, and then if 5 kids are struggling, they don't have the time.
Well, if I'm successful with some pushes here, maybe we can get teachers in the education department more money. I mean, Michigan spends $2.1 billion a year on keeping people in prison. 1.6 billion of it goes directly to keeping folks housed in institutions. $1.6 billion. On average, each student in a classroom that you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
is probably allocated roughly $2,100.
Wow.
And of instruction time.
Right.
They're getting
right.
about $2,000 worth of instruction time
Wow.
in a year, when we're spending 1.6 to keep the old people in jail.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a very nasty thing to look at, like having children in this state in our society, that we have to go the extra mile to advocate for a decent education,
Mm-hmm.
because the education system is so maxed and overwhelmed.
Now, speaking about education, what's the education system like in prison? You'd said you'd went to college while you're incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
Is there quite a bit of opportunity for people to do that, or what is that like?
There hadn't been. When I was first committed to MDOC, Pell Grants were like right on their way being phased out.
Okay.
And so for, the better part of 20 years, there was, if you didn't pay out of pocket for a correspondence course, you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was so convoluted. The process was convoluted, difficult to do. You'd always have to send money out of your account. Sometimes administratively, it just wasn't, conducive.
And how would you get that money?
From family members.
Okay.
People sending it to your account, maybe specifically for that course or what have you. But around, I want to say 2014, Jackson College in Jackson County got MDOC to approve a program where they would send adjunct professors in and teach courses inside the facility. They used a model that was already present under the guise of what's called Inside Out. MSU has done it, U of M, Jackson, Albion, I believe Eastern has as well.
Okay.
But they'll have a particular course that is brought into the facility, taught by that professor, bringing 15 students from the community inside the prison facility to have that course with 15 students from inside.
That's kind of cool.
So it was a meshed learning stage, seminar taught course.
That kind of reminds me. Sorry, that kind of reminds me of what they do at our work. I work at GM,
Okay.
and we always refer to it being like a prison.
Yeah.
And they do the same thing. They bring in people to teach classes at the plant.
Yeah. So that's exactly what it was. Just us sharing space with 15, community students at that college, and wonderful experience. Then Jackson also brought in, year-long courses, and guys were obtaining associates and bachelor degrees very quickly, very quickly. I remember remarking to a professor. They were like, "Listen, the student body in here, the GPA is, you guys are killing on-campus students." And I'm like, "Get out of here! Stop! You stop it! You're lying! You're lying." And I thought about it. I said, "Well, most of your students are like 21, 22. like they don't even have the attention span
Mm-hmm.
to focus on what they need to. They're
Right.
out trying to get pizza and hang out or something. When I'm sitting in a cell all day with nothing to do but study, do my
Right.
homework, and be prepared for the next week's class.
Right.
So it was a different approach, and guys were, I think it built a lot of self-esteem for folks. I seen a lot of men stand up a little taller, heads up a little higher,
Mm-hmm.
when they were receiving 4.0 GPAs in courses when 10 years ago they couldn't read.
Wow. That's
So
insane.
like yes, but it wasn't as accessible as you would think.
Mm-hmm.
The latter part of, so I would say from like 2014 through, several colleges were doing that. The drawback to that is, for tuition at a community college, we were paying what folks are paying at U of M and MSU for tuition.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
That's
so
insane.
it's gotten a little thinner. The programs have gotten thinner. The involvement has gotten thinner just based on the financial burden.
That's
it's
insane.
impossible to pull it off.
And that's still the people who are incarcerated still have to pay for that.
Yeah, or
Wow.
their loved ones. Somebody
Wow.
in there. So like, I mean, if you have a wife and she's the only person sending you money, she either sending you money for cakes and cookies, or she's sending you money for your college.
Wow. See, I just don't understand, like, especially if somebody has the opportunity to get out of prison, why aren't there resources available for people to educate themselves?
Well, that goes to the question of what is corrections for.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout America, there's this narrative of being tough on crime. We started to hear it in the latter part of the 70s. Administrations, Nixon moving into the 80s and looking at the Reagan administration. The policies passed by the Reagan administration, which were aimed at drug users. That policy criminalized poverty. It made an impoverished behavior criminal.
Selling drugs and
Well, not selling them, using them.
using them.
Just using them. They made that criminal. I mean, selling drugs had always been criminal.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that you criminalize poverty, you see, especially in Michigan, from 77 or 78 through 2015, 700% spike in the prison population.
Wow.
Well, those are because of policies that were in place or were moved on each decade.
Right.
In the 80s, it was, the anti-drug policy through the Reagan administration. In the early 90s, it was the policy by the Clinton administration. And then, also, I believe, was it 96, 95, 96, the Clinton administration changed the habeas corpus rules and regulations, so like you could only file one. Put an ADPA limitation, so it's the Anti-Effective Death Penalty Act, where it precludes a person from filing multiple habeas corpus petitions to the federal court, because the federal court is usually where someone who's been convicted in Michigan will get the most action in an appeal. State courts, the appellate court, Michigan Supreme Court, have not always been inmate friendly, if you will. So if you're incarcerated in Michigan, you're doing legal work, or you have an appellate attorney, the general philosophy is you'll get most of what, if you're going to get any relief, it'll be in the federal courts. Well, in the mid 90s, Clinton changed that. So we won't continue to have these petitions to get out and have all of these these other variables and levers that let people out of prison. So putting that limitation on it put a backlog on prison, and our population swelled even more. And then, as Michiganders, we got behind something that was bad. We got behind a bad piece of policy, man. We got behind truth in sentencing, and we're paying a hefty ransom for it every year.
You want to explain what that is?
Yeah, so truth in sentencing is mandatory minimum sentencing scheme in Michigan.
Scheme.
Yeah. So prior to truth in sentencing, you would serve 85% of your sentence. If you were convicted of and sentenced to 10 years in Michigan, you would be paroled after about 8 years, 7 months. That
Okay.
was when your earliest release date would come up. But if, let's say, you're serving a 10 to 25-year sentence, you could be, continued until that 25-year sentence is over.
Okay.
Now, truth in sentencing came into effect 98, 99, and it was sold and packaged to Michigan citizens as these inmates will serve 100% of the sentence that you heard them receive. Speaking to the victims,
Wow.
right? They'll serve 100% of that minimum sentence. They won't have to see a parole board. They'll be released into the community because of presumptive parole based on the amount of time that they've served incarcerated. Even if those were the terms being used, this is just paraphrasing the process. That wasn't the truth. Truth in sentencing came in. Folks were getting sentenced in Michigan courts. Let's say that same person got a 10-year sentence. He served the 10 years and then was reviewed by the parole board, and the parole board gave him a 24-month continuation. So in 18 months, he's reviewed by the parole board again, now having close to 12 years in, and they give him a 12-month continuation.
Wow.
So when he goes back in another 8 months after that, he served in excess of 126% of his time. So we told victims and citizens that this was the right policy to pass. This was the right thing to do because it would make Michigan safer. Michigan still ranks top 20 in homicides, top 20 in assaults, top 20 in rapes, top 20 in robberies.
Wow.
In the nation, we've no safer.
We haven't changed status whatsoever.
No, we're no safer today than we were in 1995.
Wow.
There's more people here, so it doesn't, per capita doesn't look the same.
Right.
But no. Make no mistake about it. The policies, truth in sentencing was in effect a result of the 1992 passing of Mr. Biden's legislation that was written in '88. He was instrumental in writing that policy, the Crime Bill Act for the Clinton administration, and that gave states incentives to institute mandatory minimum sentencing. If you create mandatory minimum sentencing, the federal government will give you money to build prisons to prepare for the boom of folks you'll get.
Wow. That's insane.
And we bid on it because our political efficacy was trash.
Yeah.
It wasn't us. It wasn't our son. It wasn't our father. It wasn't our mother. And we just kept our heads in the sand. And then we look up and we're part of part of the tax that you're paying out of General Motors is a $2.3 billion tab and just around the corner at Department of Corrections. So yeah, right now we're all complicit in it because we haven't demanded for things to change.
Right.
It's crazy that a state would spend that amount of money under the guise of keeping people protected, and you're no safer.
Right.
I mean, only 1% of the people in prison will never get out. Currently, there's 31,000 folks incarcerated in Michigan.
Wow.
Throughout about 29 to 33 prisons.
How many? Do you know how many of them are violent?
I couldn't say.
You couldn't say. Okay.
Maybe 40 to 55%. I mean, it's possible that it's even more. But here's the thing. Let's say that 70% of the folks that are incarcerated in Michigan are there for violent crime. 31,000 folks incarcerated. That means that about 310 of them will never see the outside of a cell. Right? Only 1% will never get out. So everybody else they're going to live on the street from you. So at some point, you'll be in the grocery store with them. When you go bowling, you'll be with them. When you take your kids to Kalahari, they'll be there with their kids. Like, these people are getting out.
Yeah.
You can't keep them from getting out. I mean, you can, but
right.
legally they're coming home. These were once your neighbors before.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be your neighbor again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, I'd much rather give somebody an education, give them some programs, get them ready
To come
for
back
society.
in it. Yeah.
I mean, I had a senator, I'll leave nameless, ask me if before he knew my backstory, asked me if I would want to have a convicted murderer live next door to me. And I said, yeah, I would, if he was like me. If he, took the steps to change. He's like, well, what do you mean like you? And I had to explain to him that I had been convicted of homicide while sitting in his office talking to him about moving policy.
What'd he say?
He had his meeting came up. he had like a 5-minute window to get to his next meeting. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was funny. That was funny. But it's we have to do better. We have to we have to educate ourselves and become informed. There's a lot of things that as citizens of this, of the state that we can do to change the realities, the burdens that we're taking, on for institutions, cornerstone institutions. I mean, the criminal legal system is essential to the fibers of the American way.
Mm-hmm.
But not if we're doing it wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's what I'm doing at, my title at MJA is I'm their campaign director. And I came in back in March to help, facilitate the direction and the strategy of how we can get a good time policy instituted in the state of Michigan. What that has now culminated to is us working with several legislators' offices. We're looking for both Democratic and Republican support and sponsorship.
How much Republican support do you get on this? Because I would assume that you get probably a lot of Democratic support, but
well, so yeah, of course, right. Dems will be more open to the conversation.
Right.
They've been more receptive to the conversation. Republicans want to know why it doesn't make sense. And that's what I found working with, lawmakers is that Republicans are concerned about appropriations. Where's the money coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Great idea. Wonderful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to pay for it?
Right.
I don't have the money to pay for that. If you come up with the money, yeah, we could talk about it. But when you're talking sound policy with Republicans and highlighting dollars, like a different conversation. Like the holistic approach to doing what's right isn't, maybe not the priority there. And I'm not saying that, these are bad folks. It's just
right.
They're more fiscally responsible than the other side, maybe.
Right.
And that's okay. We need that, We
It's
need
a good
somebody
balance.
we need somebody to be fiscally responsible.
Now, when they bring up where are we going to get the money from, what is your guys' response? What is MGA's response to that?
Well, there's no money that needs to be raised to push this policy.
Just needs to be allocated.
MDOC already has the processes to calculate time. Time computation exists inside the Department of Corrections.
Okay.
They already calculate time based on 30-day intervals. So our legislative asks for Michigan is that a policy be in place that affords retroactivity so that it would be applied to everybody currently incarcerated.
Okay.
That it has no crime carve-outs. So, like, if you're convicted of the sale of drugs and if you're convicted of homicide, you both have the opportunity to receive the same amount of good time credit based on your behavior that anybody else would. And the reason for that is if we don't start, and, there's a lot of advocacy work for CJ reform, but everything has been about nonviolent offenders. Well, we can attribute this change to nonviolent folks. We can give this to nonviolent folks. We don't want to touch violent folks. But the violent people are the ones that are in there like doing better. They're the ones that are focused. They're the ones that really like, damn, I messed up and I really have to think about some things here. Because they have the most amount of time, usually.
Right.
But also, going back to my point, is that only 1% of the people incarcerated in Michigan won't get out. I mean, that's a lot of folks. Right now, you're talking about 31,000 people. 31,000
It's a lot of people.
that will be in society.
It's a city.
Every year, they're kicking out 7,000 people, roughly.
Wow.
So every year, this community receives 7,000 people.
They receive and dismiss 7,000 people.
Yeah, it's about the same. Yeah.
Wow.
It's about balanced. So I think we commit like upwards of 7,200. I think the last annual commitment receipt was about that, and the parole was about 6,800. So a few hundred off. Yeah.
That's insane.
That's a lot of people out of the community, man.
That's a crap ton of people. Holy crap.
There's a lot of people out of the community throughout the state of Michigan, and most of them are coming from Wayne County, Kent County, Genesee County, Ingham County, Washtenaw County, obviously
metro areas.
Wherever there's a urban core, that's where your base is coming from. I mean, 54% of the people incarcerated black.
Wow. In Michigan?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's absurd. Well, I mean, there's 9-10 million people here. Black people percentage is like 14% African American in the state. So, but out of 31,000 people, half of it's black.
Now, I don't know if you know the percentages of that either, but would it be because of drugs or?
Well, yeah, I think that again, going back to the Reagan administration, the Reagan administration, you know, they didn't initiate tough on crime; they crystallized it with the anti-drug policy.
Right.
They crystallized how American criminal legal systems should approach this pandemic that we were facing. Well, as you see, 84 through 87, the crack epidemic skyrocketed and plagued every black community in America.
Yeah.
No black community was saved from crack. Not one. Not one.
Yep.
And by the time we were going into the 90s, we had like in 1987, 88, this happened as a wave across America, but Michigan instituted it, and I believe in 87 is the automatic waiver provision. So here you have late 80s, you've incarcerated a large body of black male folks in America. The legal age, right? So we're talking 18 to 30 are incarcerated.
Wow.
Well, now you have the children of those men being ushered into the prison system as juveniles because of this spike in violence, because of this spike in illicit drug sale. So the violence came from the illicit drug sale. But then leaving out of the 80s, going into the 90s, other policies giving states an incentive to say, hey, if you create a policy that will mandate that somebody serves, 20 to 30 years in prison for a drug offense, we'll give you money to house them. Well, now I'm built 6-7 more prisons.
Right.
At one point, Michigan had like 47 prisons operating.
Holy shit.
Right now, they say that there's only 29 in operation, but it costs $33 million to operate it.
Wow.
So we're only max capacity at 31,000. Like they don't even need all of those facilities up and running currently. So a lot of money that's being allocated to that budget is allocated to run facilities that are debilitated. The conditions are horrible. They may even only have 100 people at the facility.
Well, you had mentioned in the beginning about having to worry about going to the chow hall or whatever. Because your potatoes might have maggots on it.
Yeah.
that's an example you gave. So is that something like that you would see in prison?
Oh yeah. So when I first went in, food services was ran by the state. So state employees, usually it would be an officer that would be allocated to that post, and then they've been doing it for 20 years. They changed that 2012, 13, somewhere up in there. And they went to a privatized food provider.
Okay.
I mean, it was commonplace to hear about maggots in the rice, uh, rat droppings in
Oh my
corn.
gosh. And they would
Uh,
still serve it?
yeah.
Wow.
Mm. I laugh because for me, it's like, I can remember being in segregation and getting a tray full of fecal matter.
You're saying it like yeah, it's just normal thing.
Yeah,
Like,
I've been in segregation and got a tray with fecal matter on it. Here, you can eat it, and I had to eat around it.
wow.
It was in one. You know how you get those trays where it's like sectioned off,
Mm-hmm.
portioned off.
Yeah.
And the portion for probably like fruit
Wow.
had fecal matter in it. And said, well, I mean, that's your tray for the next week, so you'll eat around it or you won't.
Holy cow. I don't even know what to say about that.
Neither do I.
That's disturbing. That's really disturbing that we allow that to happen.
Well, I hear that, and I agree. Like, we, as a society, we should be up in arms about the way in which we treat people who are othered. Period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do it for every other demographic, a person that's othered. We go the extra mile to consider folks. But when it comes to people who are incarcerated, that, like, when you receive that scarlet letter, you're the dredge of the earth. Nobody really wants to engage with that person.
Mm-hmm.
They think that those folks deserve to be there.
Right. Yeah.
They
deserve the worst of the worst.
I've had friends, associates and friends that, cellmates, men that I've mentored. I'll even go so far as to say that I've been a father to in prison. Everybody is not. There are great people incarcerated. Great people incarcerated. Horrible circumstances for them.
Mm-hmm.
Horrible realities for them to deal with. But I know a young guy in particular who killed a man who had raped his mother several days prior and was breaking back into the house to assault her again.
Wow.
He gave this guy life in prison. He gave him life in prison. He was 16, 15.
Wow.
And, so, like, he's not a bad kid. He just didn't want his mother raped.
Right.
And, I know him well. Know him real well. I know men in there who, a kid who killed his girlfriend on accident and tried to hide it.
Oh.
Just a scared kid. He don't know what to do. He tried to hide it, tried to cover it up, thinking that he, could get away with it if he hid her. The guy's got like 45 years plus life. Wow. So that's we redemption is this, I think, a fallacy in the American psyche.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see folks who've been antagonized be the victor.
Mm-hmm.
We love it. I mean, when Batman was getting beat up by Bane, everybody hated it. When Batman, regained his composure and got his stuff together and beat Bane, it's like, the hero. We love to see it,
Well, I mean, like you had mentioned with the senator you were talking to,
Mm-hmm.
he was all for whatever you were talking about, but the minute you had mentioned that you had
Mm-hmm.
attempted to kill somebody, then it was all over at that point.
Well, yeah.
And I think it's easy to be like, oh, fuck that guy. Like he's a piece of shit. He's always a piece of shit because
Right.
he did this thing when he was 14 or 15, even 16 years old.
Yeah.
But the truth is, people change over time.
When you're 16 years old, you have no idea what's going on in the world.
You don't even know who you are at 16.
You don't. Some people don't know who they are at 40.
Dude, I still don't know who I am.
But so it looking at how we treat society that lives in poverty, because crimes that guys who are selling drugs will use the most vile folks in our society, or this is what our society would say. It's like these people they destroy the American fiber.
Mm-hmm.
Illicit sale of drugs in communities where violence is the go-to of control, so to speak, or the go-to response for dispute resolution. Um, I don't know anybody I grew up with who sold drugs because they wanted to. They did it because they thought they needed to. They made an irrational decision to say, I need to sell drugs to support myself. I know men whose mothers smoked crack and sold their bodies while their father was dead or in jail. I know men whose mother and father smoked crack. I sold drugs to my family members, my aunts and uncles, 12, 13, 14 years old.
Wow.
I helped destroy their lives, right?
Yeah.
This is what people are coming from, desperate, desolate reality. On average, if your household in America does not bring in $72,000, you can't pay for an alternator fix if your truck goes bad. So we look at people with a $40,000 a year job that has a 401k plan, has 100% medical, 80% dental, 60% vision. You give him $40,000 salary. That's gonna look like about $34,000 after taxes. That's not shit.
It's not.
So if your significant other, if you have one, does not make 40 as well, and doesn't have like student debt out of their ears,
Right.
like you can't even pay your bills month to month.
Yeah.
Like you're struggling with paying bills.
Yeah.
And we criminalize that. We criminalize people for being broke. They behave in a manner that our society is saying we detest this behavior. We have to do something about you because that can't stand. So put him in a closet, as opposed to saying, wait a minute, well, what's the problem? He robbed that person because what? Well, he can't pay his bills. Well, that ain't our fault. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That we make ourselves believe it's not our fault. Yes, it is. If people can't eat in this society, it's our fault. If they can't work, it's our fault.
Right.
If they cannot house themselves, it's our fault. We're here. They're here. Where's our responsibility to our fellow citizen?
Yeah, I mean, we pour all this money and resources into, like you said, the prison system and all these other. I had a gentleman on yesterday, and after the podcast, he was telling me about how much money the city gives the police force, and how, you know, he was talking about how he believes that they need to reallocate it, not defund them, but reallocate it to different areas and whatnot. But we have all this money that we give away to these certain things that are being used for whatever. Why aren't we reallocating some of that into the community to provide better jobs, better opportunities for people, impoverished communities?
That's a common question. Like, why don't we?
Right.
So $2.3 billion a year on corrections. What you're talking about is the city's annual budgets for police funding, right?
Yeah.
In Grand Rapids, the police agency there receives 32% of the general city budget. It's millions of dollars that they get to buy bullets and guns and trucks. There's not one community or one organization or program in my community in Grand Rapids ran by the police. Nothing funded, no community engagement opportunities, no networking opportunities, no mixers, none of this, right? Like nothing put into the community, but more police that don't live there.
Wow.
There's somebody from East Lansing police in my neighborhood.
Really?
Fresh out of college.
Wow.
He talked to me like for 20 minutes the other day. Not long out of college, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years out of college. Went to a state. Is from East Lansing. Went through the academy there, and he's placed in our neighborhood. He doesn't know any of the old ladies around there, any of the old men. He knows nobody. That he doesn't know what the culture is like. So if he sees two young men holding the arm of this lady, I'll call her Miss Jenkins, they may say, well, they may be assaulting her.
Right.
They walk her to the store and the bus stop every day.
That's part of the problem is you get police officers who aren't part of the community.
Yeah.
And then they kind of look at it from like an outside perspective. Like they may see like a black man walking, like, oh, what's he up to?
Right. And
I don't know him, so what's he up to?
I don't know him because you're not from over here.
Right.
You don't know that he's walking this. He's going to wait for the old lady who lives next door to him because she takes the bus home from work.
Right.
And that was his mother's best friend. And he does it every day. He's did it every day for the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know it because you're not from here.
Did you see the video? I'm sure you did. Of the police officer or the sheriff from Flint, Michigan, where
Mr. Swanson. Sheriff Swanson.
Yeah. Where
Yeah.
he told everybody, we're one of you. We're not going to we're gonna put our batons and our shields down, and we're gonna walk with you.
I
thought that was pretty
like
cool.
that the sheriff up there. So I'm the campaign director for MJA. I'm the West Michigan Regional Coordinator for Nation Outside. I run my own consulting firm.
Wow.
I'm starting my own nonprofit. A couple of for-profit businesses.
What's the nonprofit?
The Justice League. So social justice issues, but a little different.
I think I was trying to get a hold of somebody from that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have a bone to pick with America about a lot of things, man. and you
You're
know,
on a mission.
while working at the ACLU, I learned so much. I'm talking so much.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that we fund, the way that we throw money at police agencies is absurd. The way that we have, there's 9 million people in America on correctional control. So jail, prison, parole, probation, 9 million. 9 million people in America under correctional control. We're spending too much money. I don't want to call it fear mongering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black on black crime is a lie. Just as much as saying white on white crime. Like white people kill white people.
Mm-hmm.
If you get into a dispute with your buddy around the corner, like there's nobody coming here from Chicago to pick a fight with you.
Right.
Or from my neighborhood to pick a fight with you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know you. The hell they gonna fight you for?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to fight the guy down the street he has a problem with. Just so happen that guy live in the community. He's probably black too.
Right.
Well, there's no difference. The rates for black on black crime is like 88, 87%. For white on white crime is like 89%.
Okay, so it's right around the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
White males kill white males at the same rate that black males kill black males. Just at the same rate as Hispanic males kill Hispanic males.
So where did that come from? The black on black crime thing. Because it's something that I've heard repeated a lot. Like, oh, they kill each other,
I like to believe that I was an avid reader in prison. Like, I would read anthropology books that was this thick.
Wow.
Just for shits and giggles. But I remember reading this book called Anacalypsis. And the guy, I can't recall his name at the time, but he pointed me to another one of his works where he explains the reason that we can mistreat the African is because we've spent eons educating folks on how less than us they are.
Mm.
The only way that you can mistreat another person is if in your psyche you believe that you're better than them. Right. Or that they don't deserve that treatment. So all of the anthropological studies that we now know were erroneous about bone structure and brain cavity volume and evolution about black folks. Mm-hmm. We know that these studies are wrong now. We know that they were erroneous. Not that they were lying, they just were wrong. That laid the foundation for African people to be mistreated in this world, because you can't mistreat people who you see as equal to you or as just as viable as you. You
right.
can't do it.
Right.
Your moral compass won't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can look at that person and say they're not human,
they're less than me. Yeah.
Everything says they're not human. The whole world says they're not human.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I to say different?
Right.
The whole world says it. The whole world knows it. The only people that don't know it is them. That's the philosophy. So it's very easy to see how, you know, 67% of those 9 million people are black. 9 million people that are under correctional control in this country, 70% of them are African Americans. So it's not a secret that, you know, it's obvious to me that the black on black crime tag, if you will, is to continue the narrative that impoverished black men and women need to be incarcerated. There's no other reason for that narrative. Is that we need to be incarcerated, we need to be controlled. You need to fear the young black male and the young black woman, because they're going to do something to you, and the only way for us to help you is if you give us the power and the authority to control them.
Right.
And we'll send them in prison. And you know, I'm gonna say this. I don't know how this land, right? Slavery has never left. It has not gone anywhere. The Emancipation Proclamation is a paper tiger. It don't have no teeth. It's a lie. We've been lied to. Not just black people, Americans have been lied to. We've been misguided, misdirected, misinformed, miseducated. I mean, both of you guys learned in school that Christopher Columbus discovered Native Americans in America.
Yeah.
Come on, man. What?
Yeah.
Everybody learned that. They still haven't changed it.
Right. Nope. They haven't.
We know that this is not the truth.
Right.
They say that the Civil War was about freeing slaves. And we know that's not the truth.
Yeah.
But we still teach it. We still teach it to our children.
Why is that? It's just we haven't changed the educational system. What?
Man, look how great it's working. It works.
It does.
It works.
Even though we all know.
Black people love Abraham Lincoln. They don't know him. They don't know that Abraham Lincoln, most folks would not know that Abraham Lincoln detested slaves and said, if I didn't have to do this to save the Union, I wouldn't. If I didn't have to free one slave, I wouldn't dare do it. Nobody highlights that in the narrative. Nobody highlights that there was a 13th Amendment prior to the one that was enacted. Nobody highlights the fact that that 13th Amendment gives states unequivocal decision-making power to treat impoverished people the way that they see fit. We don't unpack it because it's either too much to understand, it's too convoluted to understand, or we just believe that we're not part of the fabric of the American way. So I don't want to know nothing about that, right? But for those folks who do know, I mean, I would love to hear people talk about it more. The black on black crime, the narrative that black men are violent and, you know, everything to boot with that are all lies. And it's propaganda told to us, black, white, and other in America, to continue the narrative that this demographic of persons is different. It's okay to put them in closets. It's okay to kill them on television in front of everybody. It's okay to choke this guy in front of everybody in America. Nobody's going to care. What's going to happen? Nothing. We saw one conviction or you know, a couple of convictions out of some of the more recent, you know, violence perpetrated on black males by police agencies in the country. But large in part, nothing has ever happened to folks who, you know, and the first time we saw it in our face was Rodney King.
Right. Yeah.
We seen Rodney King be like just get whooped up and down the street by police. Then we saw all of those police get off. Like, that narrative told white America one thing. It told black America another thing.
Right. Yeah.
It told white America, you do how you see fit. You can treat them how you want to treat them. Told us, you'll be treated how they want to treat you. You're at the mercy of this other race demographic. That narrative has continued. It hasn't changed. and until people are like honest and truthful about it, that there's no such thing as black on black crime. And anthropologically, all of them, like, we're so far beyond those early studies of
right,
like evolution that nobody's even gonna listen to that garbage, right?
Yeah.
But deep in our psyche, we still behave and respond like that.
It's isn't it called like incomplicit biasm or?
Yeah, right. So yeah, to some extent, yeah.
Thing.
I like to call it deceptive intelligence. You'll deceive yourself that this isn't what's going on when you know that it is.
Mm-hmm.
You'll use deceptive intelligence and frame it like this. Well, we know that in America, the percentage of, African American persons disenfranchised from the employment sector is X number. No, just say that that white supremacy is in play, and most institutions that have white supremacist cultures that automatically pushes folks out of the hiring pool. Like, say that, because that's accurate. Disparities aren't accurate. There isn't there's one disparity. One, not multiple. You have an adverse philosophy about including this demographic of persons into your company.
Mm-hmm.
That's racist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not a disparity.
Yeah.
Like, you can split it like that and tailor it for public opinion and political correctness. But if we ain't learned nothing from our most recent president, Mr. Trump, levels of uncomfort get things done. Like, discomfort moves people.
Absolutely.
You don't move until you're uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And he made America uncomfortable, and they said a lot about it. They did. They either said, hell yeah, that's how I feel too, bro. Or, I don't know about that. I'm going to go over here, man. I'm not going to lie to myself with you. But
he definitely pushed people into two different parties, and like whether you were the extreme right, you went towards him, or if extreme left, I guess some extreme left kind of agreed with some of the ideas of him, but then they also were like, I can't really associate myself with that,
right,
because that's so extreme,
right.
It's kind of crazy.
But going back to the poverty thing, I'm glad you mentioned that. You look at two broke people, like just look at the relationship between two impoverished men, black and white, and the relationship between two very wealthy men, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these two folks, because of all of the other variables, the two men living in poverty are probably going to have all kind of angst and discord with each other because of the social structure, right?
Social structure as in just like
how we engage with each other, where we may engage with each other. Let's say these two men are mechanics, and the African American is going to the Caucasian male that is the supervisor at a shop, right? Okay. They're both living in poverty, but this guy has a position over him. Right. The African American may feel that he was mishandled or mismanaged based on this guy being white because of his narrative. Mm-hmm. But his narrative may be, well, the black guy's gonna be lazy anyway, and he got a record, and I don't want to deal with that. He don't know nothing about this guy. You don't know the guy got 7 kids he taking care of by himself. That he's a single father.
Right.
That he got 2 other jobs. This is just to help pay for school shoes.
Right.
He don't know that because he didn't give himself a chance to learn it.
Right.
His mind, this guy ain't nothing. He lazy anyway. Yeah. Probably gonna be in jail in a month. Why give him a job?
Right.
Get out of here. So we both have those things, right? But there's 2 wealthy people. They don't care nothing about your skin color. He care about how much money you got. Mm-hmm. That you don't see people not making business deals because they white or they black. They wealthy. They don't care. It don't affect them.
Money's the same color.
Because if you have resources, the playing field is now level.
Right.
Well, this is a world full of people that don't have resources. And the only way that we respond to it is by locking them up. So if you don't have no resources, go to jail. Mm-hmm. You can't pay your bills, go to jail. You can't make money in this nation. You're not an entrepreneur. You don't want to go to school. You're not intelligent. You don't have a high school diploma. You can't go to school. Go to jail. Just go to jail.
It's really your only option. I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you're in that position, you feel like that's your only option.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you feel like you're inevitably going to end up there anyways.
Man, I thought my mother was rich when she told me that our house costed $25,000.
Wow.
It's like, what? You paid $25,000?
That's a lot of money.
My God, that's a bunch of money. Like 7. I don't know nothing about money. $25 ain't nothing. $25,000 is nothing. It's a house, piece of garbage.
Yeah, that's poverty.
Yeah. And then when I realized, like, oh, my mother can't rub 2 hot coins together. I'm not going through this. Like, I don't want to live like that. I can't even go to school to get without getting talked about every day. The way I look.
Right.
I'm not even going to school. I was so intelligent, man. I'm talking about whiz kid in school. Like, I was supposed to be an architect somewhere.
Wow.
Like, really had, academics and administrators getting behind me to push me towards an architecture career, like in the 7th grade.
Wow.
And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Something didn't sit right with me. Teachers would come to my mother and say, listen, he does the work. Or he'll give me the answers, but he won't do the work. He won't show it. And I'm like, I can't tell you how X times 5 through the FOIL process comes out to this. I know that's the number. But give it to me in drugs, I tell you. I will. I can tell you how the ounce will transfer over to this many grams, and I can explain algebra to you like that because that's relevant to my everyday life.
It's kind of funny. I worked with a guy. He was like, he's now passed away, but he was telling me that he sucked at math in school. He sucked at it. But then once he started selling drugs, he was like, I learned all about grams and ounces.
It's funny. I was a mentor in for ASL and GED courses and a tutor for GED courses in prison. And this kid, he had one test for the GED to take, was the math test. And he was like, bro, like, I don't even want to look at it. I'm scared to even open the book. It was almost as though when it came to numbers, he was dyslexic. So I said, I don't know how I'm going to get to him. I don't know how I'm going to help him get this GED. Like, he going to fail. And then I thought about it. I was like, this guy, he's from the streets. He loved drugs. He sold drugs since he was a young kid. He saw his father sell drugs, his mother sell drugs. And I went to talking to him about it in drugs. And he understood it immediately.
Wow.
It's just, again, student not understanding the curriculum. It's the teacher's responsibility to figure it out. But, that goes back to a different point. But, yeah, we hide and conceal that we don't know things. And that's not a black thing. That's a male thing. That's a human thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a self-worth thing. And there's a lot of people in this world that haven't had opportunities, that haven't had resources. And we shouldn't other them because of it. We shouldn't treat them like, they're the scourge of the earth.
Absolutely.
Because, they didn't have an opportunity or don't have resources at their fingertips. When we share resources and share information that can then, build into resources, we're doing much more of a service to our community, much more of a service to, our human peers. And we have to do better about things like that. I mean, we want our society to be different, we have to do it.
Like, we have to make a proactive.
Yeah, you're the manager of the society. Yeah. We're the ones managing it. Why not be very active and be proactive about, hey, I'm intentional about making sure that this part of American culture is better, or this part of our fibers of our society are better. Whether that's coming from an advocacy standpoint, whether you're talking about municipal government or state government, federal government, the education system, employment, housing. I don't know about here in Lansing, man. It costs $1,000 for like a studio apartment in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, that's insane.
Nobody can pay it.
Yeah.
Nobody can.
I have a job. I can't pay that.
Man, I have
I have a good job, and I can't pay that.
I got 7 jobs and I can't pay it, man. I don't, it's to live in America is tough. It is tough, man.
Yep.
And that's
Well,
one of the biggest issues.
I mean, it kind of brings us back to these impoverished communities where, like, if you don't have, like, I have a good job and I couldn't pay $1,000 a month for a studio apartment. I mean, I could, but why would you?
It wouldn't facilitate your life.
Exactly. And so then that leaves me with one choice. I have to go to an impoverished community and rent a house or an apartment that, you know, is not in a good area.
Right.
And then you just kind of become a victim of your surroundings.
Go stay there for 15 years and see how bad your blood pressure gets. Like, really. Go live in that community for 15 years and don't see if you don't have migraines and high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And you start to have, you know, you like, damn, what's going on with me, man? Let me go get a stress test. And they like, hey, you got some erratic movement beats in your heart, and that's coming from stress. You stressed every day because when you come home from work, it's about 7 guys at the corner selling drugs.
Right.
You can't pay to live nowhere else.
And if you have kids, you don't want to send them outside to go play.
You're not going to. They're going to be in the house driving you crazy. Now, they stressed out. So, you know, we don't see the connectors to a lot of it, but it's obvious. It's there in our face. We don't see it when we hide our heads, man. You know what I mean? And we don't. I remember reading a quote. It wasn't a quote. It was looking at the etymology of the word citizen or citizenry. And the etymology of it, the core of the word came from to be involved. Like, you weren't considered a citizen of a community in ancient times if you didn't do something in the community.
Right.
If you weren't active in the community, if you didn't sell the community groceries or vegetables or put horseshoes on the horses or fixed wheels on the carts, like, you weren't considered a citizen of that community. That
kind of goes back to being part of a tribe too.
Yeah,
you know, like, everybody had their part. You're either a hunter-gatherer or, you know, you took care of things at camp.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because in, like, criminal justice reform work, there's this talk about restorative justice. Everybody, mostly like from West Michigan and you know, Dutch reformers, are like, hey, we got to institute restorative practices in the court process. We should have restorative practices, a restorative court even, right? Well, the first places we saw restorative practices were in African tribes, where if I assaulted you and took your life, and let's say you were the person who were the shepherd for the goats, I have to do that for an allotted amount of time. I got to go do that work. That's what the agreement would be.
Wow.
You took one of our tribes, man. How are we going to eat?
Right.
He coming over here for 10 years. We send him home. Matter of fact, he'll marry my daughter in 10 years when his time working here is done. That was you were restoring what you took from the community.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So we'll rely today on ancient practices, but we'll ignore those realities that really come with it, that, you know, these are things that you should be instituting and looking at, the historical context of what we're dealing with. And that goes to how we deal with impoverished persons. It's just like, I don't, that's not my tribesman.
Right.
I don't have to do that.
Yep. Now, as far as MGA, where's things at with that?
Yeah. So we're working with, I'll leave this senator nameless because he may change his mind somewhere down the line.
Is he Republican?
No, it's a Democrat who we're looking for sponsorship. So we worked with his office, and the process is this. John Q. Citizen gives Senator X some suggestions of policy, like, hey, I want a policy to change the stoplights from green to orange. They send that person's suggestions off to what's called LSB, or the Legislative Services Bureau. Okay. And folks in there help that senator's office or rep's office work with the language of the bill. They draft it. They'll send it to that organization, John Q, back and forth for a minute before they, both can agree that, hey, this is something that I would like introduced. And then that person can say, this is something I'm comfortable sponsoring. Something
I can get behind.
Yeah. So we got into a space where we're having those conversations. I mean, we've met with over 100 elected officials in the state.
Wow.
Senators and reps together. We've met with an absurd amount of judges, mayors, prosecutors, um, advocacy groups, victims' rights organizations. We've talked to everybody in the state of Michigan over the last 6 months about this piece of policy.
Wow.
We aim to introduce that policy in September.
Okay.
But we're doing a lot of education. So this summer we've been, from northern Michigan to the southeastern and corners to get folks educated on what the policy entails, what the change would look like, what we'd be asking from the state. Trying to get folks involved with volunteering, Cherry Festival, art festivals in Ann Arbor, art fair in Grand Rapids, or art prize in Grand Rapids. So we're like everywhere trying to accomplish an education boom before we really get ready to drop this legislation in September, and ask that for every 30 days that an inmate in the Department of Corrections has served without a Class 1 misconduct, that 30 days be taken off their minimum and maximum sentence.
Okay.
MDOC already has the capacity to compute these sentences like that. And they work off of 30-day intervals, which is why we chose 30 days for 30 days.
Okay.
Michigan stands out in the states. We're one of 6 states that has absolutely no good time credit system. But we're the only state that makes inmates serve 100% of their time without an earned credit or good time credit system. In Michigan, because of truth in sentencing, the average person serves 126% of their sentence.
So is that something you guys are trying to work to overturn?
Yeah, so like this legislation, if passed, it demolishes truth in sentencing.
Okay.
It immediately severs it.
Right.
Which is why we're having so much opposition from like the Prosecutors Association of Michigan. Prosecutors and lawmakers, police agencies wouldn't like to see this passed because they'll hang their hats on the victim. But I mean, there's a rebuttal for that. Statistically, anybody in Michigan can go to ask Siri to give it to them. But I want to say we're like second in rapes, 22nd in homicides, 15 in violent assaults.
Wow.
Michigan isn't any safer. You are spending, you're pitching into a $2.3 billion pot to keep you safe, to keep your children safe.
Right.
But it's a lie, because you're not safer. You're no safer keeping that money in your pocket than you are if you gave them your entire salary. They still couldn't make you safer.
Right.
But they will tell you that you're not safe, and they will tell you that, as advocates for victims, that they need to be there to be honest. And we're not asking for the truth in sentencing to not be there, because we tell victims and defendants, here's your sentence is 10 to 25 years. If you behave correctly, program correctly, you can earn X amount of time off of your sentence. The victim's going to know that. You're going to know that. You may get a misconduct for insubordination. Well, you lost 30 days. You didn't get to gain 30. You didn't lose any time. You just didn't get to gain any. You didn't get any. That's going to happen. But, so it's not like, well, yeah, we passed this policy and everybody gets out of prison. No, people who do time right in prison get out of prison.
Right.
Like, if they're not doing time right, you still have to see the parole board, and they still have a say-so in whether or not you'll leave.
Right.
So
like, let's say I'm in prison, and I get into an altercation with somebody, I wouldn't gain 30 days, but previous time that gained, I wouldn't lose that.
No, you wouldn't lose what has been gained.
Okay.
But you just won't be awarded that 30 days off of your max and minimum because you caught a ticket, you got into a fight.
Right. Okay.
But and there's loopholes for that for the administrators and MDOC to kind of make it biased, right? But one bite at a time.
Right.
The only persons that, and this sucks for me, that we're not advocating for specifically is lifers. And the reason that we're not is because very small organization, MJA is, not having the resources to get behind such a big bite.
Right.
The ACLU of Michigan, Safe and Just Michigan, MySemi, excuse me, a couple other organizations are all working towards like rectifying long indeterminate and life sentences.
Okay.
The Sentencing Project, AFSC, Nation Outside, Safe and Just Michigan, and ACLU are all in there. Like some of it's siloed, some of it's coalesced work where they'll be working in cohesive groups to try to get policies in place that changes life and long indeterminate. But we knew we didn't have the capacity for it. So it's like, hey, we'll
take what you can get right now.
Leg up, yeah, and we get you guys to hold that part of it up. Maybe we can get the whole thing to tip over. But, I think that we'll be successful. I know that we'll be successful in the education. We'll change the narrative this year, next year.
Okay.
We might not get the policy passed for a couple. I would like to think that we could get it passed within this next year. That's very hopeful.
Yeah.
The climate of the legislature, I'm told from so many colleagues, they go by the climate. I hate that.
The political climate?
Oh, I hate
what
that.
sounds good?
Oh, my God, I hate it. Because to tell me that this policy is a great piece of policy, but just not now. If it's great now, it's great now.
Right.
If it's the right thing to do 3 years from now, it's the right thing to do 3 days ago.
Right.
Not because it's not the right time.
It's not good for them politically.
It's not good for them politically. So this is a ground softening campaign, if you will, like to get out, educate constituents, educate lawmakers, educate organizations, to give them realities of what's really going on. Like we're incarcerating people at an alarming rate in Michigan to our detriment. We're in a fiscal hole because of it. We spend $2.3 billion a year on corrections, and nobody is safer. And Detroit is still
Detroit,
most violent city in America.
Everybody knows that. Everybody says that.
I mean, Ingham County now, to date, 22 homicides this year or something like that.
It's gone up a lot this year, within the last year and a half.
Grand Rapids topped out at like 37, 38 last year.
Wow.
Which was like exceeded the previous high, which was like 33 or something.
Wow.
Which might have been, a decade or two ago. But, we're no safer in the state. We're no better off. And so when do we get fiscally responsible about it?
Right.
Because, my children, your children, anyway, you want your children to have a good education. You want them to grow up in good communities, good programs, good institutions. You don't want to have to, go and say, hey, that's just not part of the American culture that we even accept into our universe because of how bad it is, right? Nobody wants to say that about the legal system or about, the criminal justice and crime and punishment aspect of our culture. We'd like to educate them and say, hey, that wheel is working well.
So I would think that in order to accomplish something like this, you would kind of have to change the minds and the way that like judges and prosecutors think.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Prosecutors are like, hell no. What? I'm for the victim. You want me to let people out of prison early because it's ingrained in their psyche that I just have to be tough on crime because these got people are bad people. Yeah, the heart needle is tougher to move than the policy needle. Policy is easy.
Yeah,
like policy can be instituted and nothing happen with it. Like nobody will adhere to it. But the policy passed, but I won't recognize it. But when you change the heart and the mind, and somebody who says no, like anybody comes through my courtroom with a homicide, life.
Right.
Okay, great. Now let me explain this to you. See if that anecdotal evidence impresses you. On the other side of it, you like your money, judge, your lifestyle, I'm sure. What if you had more of it? Like, what if you were able to do so much more good with more money?
Right.
If you didn't lock up people who didn't need to be there. So the vast majority of the people in the Department of Corrections in Michigan are over the age of 40.
Wow.
So at that point, you start to age out of crime.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
For every 5 years older you are, your recidivism potential drops by 4%.
Wow.
So by the time you're 45, 50 years old, it's like a 6% chance you'll commit a crime again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we got a lot of old people locked up, a lot of people over 55, a lot of elderly men and women who's been there for 30, 40, 50 years. I know a guy, 15 years old, spent 42 years in prison.
Wow.
Good friend of mine, like, comedic, the best comic you'll ever come across.
I want to meet this guy.
and he spent 42 years in prison from the time he was 16 for armed robbery.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And
why is he still in there?
Well, he's home now.
Okay.
He was a juvenile lifer that eventually got out, but
Okay.
like, it's an armed robbery. Nobody was shot. Nobody was killed.
Mm-hmm. Wow. 42 years.
Yeah. 42 of them.
That's insane.
That's tough. But yeah, the organizations, Safe and Just Michigan, Nation Outside, MJA, MySemi, American Friends Service Committee, A Brighter Way, the ACLU of Michigan, My Liberation, Michigan United, all of these organizations, Fresh Coast Alliance is one on West Michigan, working to help reintegrate folks when they return from incarceration. There's going to be a need for us to view that demographic of persons differently.
Right.
And we need to start viewing them through the lens of, it being an issue of poverty as opposed to an issue of crime and punishment, as opposed to punishing people for crimes that we've made crimes because it's a response to poverty.
Right.
We need to now put the punishment side to education and get folks educated on what can be done and the processes to get out of poverty that may help them in their environments and in the way in which they deal with folks.
And then with that, we would have to put in play like some community resources to help people.
Sure, definitely. I mean, we definitely would have to get away from some gentrifying stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you can't even come to. People who've never been to prison can't pay for housing in some areas of the state. You know what I mean? And if you have a felony conviction, you won't get an apartment or a house.
Yeah.
I remember I was able to get a mortgage loan before I was able to rent.
Wow.
Like, I had somebody say, no, I will not rent to you. But the bank was saying, yeah, come in here so we can figure out the interest rate on this mortgage we're going to give you.
Wow.
It makes no sense.
No. That's insane.
It makes no sense.
That's kind of like I was interviewing a guy yesterday. He's a local guy who just started a business. And he was saying because he has a felony that he wasn't able to get a job working for Uber. But he wasn't able to get a job working for Uber as like delivering food on a bike. But he was able to start a business doing the same thing. He was able to have his own business, but he couldn't work for a company that did the same thing. Right. Because he has a felony that happened 6 years ago.
Is that not insane? That, yeah, you can go and create your own company and be whatever you're gonna be, but I won't hire you.
Yeah.
I won't hire you to do it, but I'll work with you when you start your company.
Oh yeah.
That scarlet letter is tough to get away from.
Yeah.
I still mention it. I'm not afraid of it. I embrace it. Like, I don't use it as a badge of honor, but I'm not afraid to answer tough questions. I'm not afraid to have tough discussions. And that's always a tough discussion for people to have because they'd much rather formerly incarcerated people who can really give you the narrative of what that is, stay quiet. Because you expose it. Most folks are coming home and they're going to get a job at a factory and they're just going to work. I got good friends of mine. Like, man, how do you do it? You going where to talk about what? You're going into the state capitol to do what? You're talking about this every day.
You're rubbing elbows with high officials.
They think I'm crazy for having these conversations.
That's how you change it.
They'll never talk about it.
Right.
Because they're just going to work, punching the clock, cashing the check, paying their bills.
They're just trying to survive.
They survive. They back into survival mode. I don't want to survive. I spent 27 years really surviving. It's time to live, enjoy life, and the only way you do that is when you're included. right? So remember, the two wealthy folks, they can have a conversation over shrimp baskets or sitting looking over the ocean or whatever. These other guys are in an argument because they don't have nothing. They don't have no resources. One thing, his job puts him in an elevated position, and now they have a conflict that they can't resolve.
Right.
Because neither one of them got resources enough to say, I have a friend in my network that has taught me about conflict resolution. This guy's having a bad day. Let me just back off of it. No, you don't even got conflict resolution, so now the two of y'all are fighting.
Right.
Now one of y'all got to go into jail. And let's say the guy the mechanic, the manager, goes to jail for a week. Say it's a Friday. He can't get out till Monday. Well, he was supposed to be back to work Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning,
now
Monday
lost his
morning.
job.
He lost his job. So now when he get out, he couldn't pay for his car. He left his wife with 2 kids while he spent 2 weeks in jail and lost his job. Now he doesn't have a car. He can't get to and from work. Now, whatever job he gets, he got to catch a bus. Within 6 months, this guy homeless. And, over something small that could have been adjusted very easily, but we continue to put people in the blender, man, and it continues to snowball. Yeah. So, somebody goes to jail for a traffic stop and spends 3 days, loses their job. Now they're homeless and can't get a job, got a felony conviction, and you're like, well, 7 months ago, I was paying my own rent. I was doing good. It just so happened that I got into this fight at work. They said they sent the summons for me to come to court, and I never seen it. I moved. I was moving. I didn't get the mail. Now you got a warrant to show up for that criminal case, and you got a charge. So it's like we rely on it, saying you are, if you're broke and you don't have no resources, our only way of dealing with you is to siphon you through the criminal legal system.
Right. Yeah, there almost needs to be like a system in play for people like that. Like if you start going down that path, you can get a hold of this resource and be like, okay, this is what's going on. I need help. I need to be set on the right path.
Guess what they'll tell you? Where's the money to run it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's in the $2.3 billion I'm helping you pay for every year for the corrections. But yeah, so a lot of stuff, man. Our society's in bad shape, and I'm glad to see folks such as yourself like highlighting who's doing good stuff, what they're doing, where it's at. But just the amount of advocacy for not just for criminal justice stuff, but social issues,
right.
Housing, employment, education, local governments, all of those things. We need to do better at it. And, the generation of millennials, I think you guys are Superman. Like, you guys are Superman for us, because you're unafraid. You're not afraid to tell somebody to fuck off and tell them about themselves. You're not afraid to say, like, I'm not doing what? Do what? Get out of here. I would never. That's not right. And I'm going to tell you that it's not right because I just don't care what you think about me.
Right.
Like, that energy from this generation is what's necessary for us to get pushed through because, a lot of folks older than me, they just tired. They don't want to do that. They don't want to do the battle no more.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, but it's fortunate that we do have a crop of young people, not just in the state and this nation that are doing great work.
Well, I think a lot of younger people, they realize that there's a lot of flaws, especially with the older generations, and they want things to change. And it's kind of funny to watch these organizations, like these big corporations, like I work at General Motors, to watch them kind of change the way they promote things based on the younger generation, because the younger generations, they're pushing for change.
Yeah.
Some of it is kind of ridiculous, but
hey, if you're passionate about something, get behind it.
Yeah, and the power of the internet with social media and like this podcast will probably reach a lot of people.
Listen, man, this is the best platform to convey or disseminate information.
Absolutely.
Music isn't in anymore. Like, music has to be disseminated through platforms like this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to have this type of end to, the ether world, is like a resource that you have to leverage at your, disposal. That's wonderful, man.
Yeah.
When folks are involved in really getting information out to people across this world, and getting folks more interested or involved, or just giving them a piece of education that may change their ideology.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I love to see young people like making noise and making people uncomfortable. Like, make people uncomfortable, man.
Absolutely.
Make them, to the point where they're saying, hey, why do you feel like that? Why do you say that? Like, I need to hear more, because it sounds right. But tell me more.
Right.
Now here's an opportunity for you to educate somebody, and they're like, you know what? I don't even think like that any longer. Off of a chance roundabout conversation.
Well, I mean, if somebody could listen to this podcast, could just be like, they could have a previous opinion about, people who are incarcerated.
Yeah.
Like, fuck that guy. Like,
Yeah,
he tried killing somebody.
Yeah.
Then they listen to you talk, and they realize how educated you are, and they listen to how you've changed, and now
Right.
you're trying to make a positive change, and they're like, oh, you know what, maybe I feel different about that now. Like, I guess I didn't really know too much about that.
Right.
And they can see it from a different light.
I laugh. I remember doing a short doc for I think it was the ACLU. It was for the smart justice stuff. And, excuse me. And it was put on like an Instagram platform. And after like a week, a colleague of mine was like, "Rich, don't even look at it. Don't. I will never watch like interviews of myself.
I don't either.
Sometimes I can listen. Sometimes, but." So they were like, no, you don't want to look at it. And I said, well, it must be a bunch of stuff being said on there. And she was like, oh, that's tons. So I went through some of the remarks, the comments.
Oh, jeez.
And it was, oh, my God, you deserve to be there. You shouldn't have did the crime. All of that stuff, right? It's typical. This when we say it.
Yeah.
Like, those folks don't know, man.
No.
They don't know. That they don't know that what those realities are like, and they're right. I did need some correction. It just I needed a hug. I didn't need a closet to live in.
Right.
I needed
for 24 years or 28.
I needed somebody to hug me and say, these are some different things that you could be doing with your life.
Right.
But I will say this: no regrets. A very unfortunate situation. The young man who was the victim in my crime, his mother and I, very, I wouldn't say very close, but we're close. We talk. We've engaged with one another, myself and their family. And, as an adult, I definitely see things a whole lot different. Being in society for the last 4 years, immediately I was able to see, like, wow, I don't operate like I did when I was a kid.
Right.
That is crazy. This is an entirely different personality. In some similar circumstances, like, who doesn't get into it with people at the car wash or gas station?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Come on, every day somebody's flipping you off because you're speeding to get off the ramp or whatever. Nobody's jumping out I'm 42 years old. I'm not jumping out fighting people, assaulting people for that. Yeah. You know what I mean? I pay taxes and got health care, man. I could go get my teeth cleaned if I want to. Like, I don't have no issues. But yeah, it's wonderful work, wonderful opportunities, and very happy to be in society and able to be a voice for folks who don't have one.
One of the reasons why I started this podcast was because people always say, well, like you did this one thing, so you're a piece of shit, or like you did this one thing, you'll always be that person. You'll always be that person. Yeah. Like, people change over, the course of even 5 years. And I'm a completely different person than I was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I started this, was because like everybody has a story, whether you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, or you were abused or whatever. You're still you're a different person. In your opinions and your life choices change over time. And I think that's real cool about you. Is like, you obviously are changed. You're not the same person that you were 24 whatever years ago. Whenever it was you committed that crime.
16. That's why I said, like, I've been under correctional control for 27 years.
27.
So 23 inside and October makes 24 or 4 years on community supervision.
Okay.
That's a long time, man.
It's a super long time.
That's a long time. And like, I remember first getting out, the anxiety I would have when I had to go report to my parole agent. I just thought I never was coming out of the building.
Wow.
Like after 4 or 5 months, I'm like, why? And I never noticed it until like a girlfriend at the time said, hey, listen, you must have got to go see your agent this week. I'm like, why you say that? She's like, because you're real tight. And I'm like, I do in 2 days. And every week when I was coming, I was an asshole. And then COVID hit and I didn't have to go in anymore. And it just, I felt so much better, man, because I always just thought that, like, no matter, I never knew what could happen. You know, some paperwork got mixed up. Until we get it straight, you got to go in the closet again.
Right.
Like, please don't do that. I've been pulled over for traffic stops. One time an officer said something to me. He told me, welcome home.
Wow.
He's like, welcome home, man. Be safe tonight.
Wow. Christmas
Eve, speeding in Mount Pleasant, going to the casino or something.
Wow.
Like, or coming from the casino during like Christmas time. And he was just like, welcome home. But then I've had officers say, I'm calling for backup, and I'm waiting till my staff supervisor get here. We're going to figure out whether or not we're going to pull you out of this car and search the entire thing and you.
Just because you have a record?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like, all right, I'm just sitting here waiting on you to get there. And then the supervisor comes and say, well, what did he do? Well, he didn't do nothing. I just ran him and that popped up. Oh,
just imagine.
No traffic violation? No. Let him go.
Just imagine if you had a job you had to get to.
Yeah, that's happened too. Pulled over here on the like 469, and I'm supposed to be in a meeting with like 2 political directors and somebody from like the Senate or the House, and I'm on the phone saying, "God, the state police out here." I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm on the exit right now. But yeah, it comes with the territory. You know, nothing that a more rational, mature mind can't handle at 42 years old.
Right.
That I definitely couldn't handle at 16. You know,
right.
Then I would have been assaulted by the police. But you know, as an adult, we do things differently, man. That's why we can't just look at humans and say they should be there forever.
Right.
That's not okay. I don't think. If I was never in prison, I just don't think that's okay. That we mistreat people that don't have, like, if you are a serial killer, serial rapist, you're doing things that you have mental disabilities that you have no control over your behavior. That's a different conversation. In the 70s and 80s, all of the mental institutions in Michigan were closed. So, like, where did all the mental health patients go?
Prison.
85% of the people that are incarcerated have a mental health issue in Michigan. Like, we're talking 26,000 people, 27,000 people with a mental health problem.
That's insane. So let's kind of end it there.
Yeah, no problem.
We're 2 hours in, almost 2 hours in.
Yeah, I'm sure that it don't never go that long.
No, I think this might be my longest one, but I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Definitely,
dude. Man. I love hearing you talk, and so right now, where are you guys at as far as
we're
getting support and whatnot?
We're out in communities across the state.
Okay.
Cold door canvassing. We're doing phone banking.
Okay.
Voter engagement at, if there's a farmer's market somewhere, you can, go to mja.org to find any of the events lists, or contact me at, rich@myjustice.org. We believe that early September, we'll introduce this legislation. The process at that point, it'll be a little wonky for a couple of months. But we look to, make a lot of noise in the last quarter of this year, educating folks on, what the policy change would entail, why we think that it's the best option for Michigan, but we'll probably see the most momentum leaving out of the year, October, November. Hopefully we're successful. If not, we have some contingency plans in place that will make sure that, you know, MJA as an organization, good time as a policy option is something that we keep, you know, in media. We keep that narrative vibrant. We keep that conversation going.
Have you guys hit mainstream media?
Some, not
Okay.
much. You know, mainstream media, like, they expensive. It's tough, but we have had some exposure through other events, like you know, our partnerships with other organizations in the area, like CPR is one, Citizens for Prison Reform group here, headed up by a colleague of mine, Lois Polano. Those folks over there are doing stuff in the greater Lansing area regularly that we're involved with. Usually there's some media component to that where we're getting some exposure. But yeah, definitely trying to get the word out as much as possible. You know, volunteers, interns alike, working very hard on this issue.
So if somebody wants to come help you guys, go door to door or whatever, they can just volunteer.
Yeah, they can go to our website at michiganjusticeadvocacy.org.
Okay.
And sign our volunteer form. There's also a petition, an online petition that we have on there, or you can contact us through the About tab on our website to contact myself or the executive director, organizing managers directly about what those opportunities are. We have a bunch of interns working on, like, collecting those volunteers, organizing them into particular departments. But yeah, we're open for all kind of volunteer opportunities, man. We're, you know, pushing people. I'm going to Traverse City when I leave here to talk to volunteers about a weekend of events there.
Oh, wow.
So, and then leaving there and going back to Jackson tomorrow, Jackson and Ann Arbor, a couple of events there we'll have volunteers at. Cool. Next month in Grand Rapids, we'll be having volunteers at Rock the Block, which is a community event on the 14th, the 13th, Progressive at the Park. There's so many events in the West Michigan area going on. If I sat here and quoted them, I probably have the dates and the places mixed up. But yeah, we're definitely looking for volunteers to help out interns. If you know, there's folks out there who are looking for internships, and you're, you know, interested in some criminal justice reform work, please reach out to us at Michigan Justice Advocacy. We got a ton of work for you.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, it's been a real pleasure having you on. I really hope that this thing really takes off for you.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me and you know, having the platform to raise an issue like this and give us the opportunity to speak to it. I've had a blast, man. You guys are wonderful.
Absolutely, man. I love it. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it.